The bullet that shattered the window of the boarding house missed Violet Parker's head by 3 inches, and she knew then that running to Wyoming had not been far enough. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering against her ribs, flour from the bread she had been kneading still dusting her trembling hands. The year was 1876, and Cheyenne was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where the sins of her father could not reach her. But as glass tinkled to the floorboards and voices shouted in the street below, Violet understood with crushing certainty that she would never be safe. Not while Marcus Bellamy still drew breath and wanted what he believed she had taken from him. The door burst open and Violet grabbed the closest thing to hand, a rolling pin, holding it like a weapon. But instead of Bellamy's hired guns, a tall man in a dusty brown Stetson filled the doorway, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. His eyes, the color of creek water in summer, swept the room and landed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. "You hurt." His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that made you believe everything might actually be all right. "No, Violet's words stuck in her throat as another shot rang out, this time further down the street. The man moved so quickly she barely saw him cross the room. He grabbed her arm, not roughly but with undeniable authority, and pulled her away from the window. "Stay down. Those men asking about you at the saloon, they mean business." He positioned himself between her and the window, his broad shoulders blocking her view of the street. "Name's Wyatt Crawford. Sheriff deputized me this morning when word came through that Bellamy's men were heading into town." Violet's knees went weak. "He sent more than 1, 3 that we counted, maybe more." Wyatt glanced at her and something in his expression softened. "But they won't get to you, I give you my word on that." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that someone could actually protect her from the nightmare her life had become. But she had learned the hard way that promises were as fragile as morning frost. Her father had promised her mother they would have a good life. Marcus Bellamy had promised her father he would forgive the debt. And her father had promised Violet he would never gamble away the deed to their ranch. All those promises had shattered like the glass still scattered across the floor. "You do not understand," Violet said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus Bellamy is not a man who gives up. He will keep coming until he gets what he wants." "And what's that?" Wyatt asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "A piece of land my father owned before he died. Bellamy claims my father owed him more than just the money, that there was a separate agreement about water rights to the creek that runs through the property. He says my father signed papers, but I never found any such documents. When I sold the land to pay his debts and left Texas, Bellamy decided I had cheated him out of his rightful claim." "Did your father sign papers?" Violet met his gaze directly. "I do not know. My father was a good man who made terrible mistakes when he drank. But even if he did sign something, I do not have it. I sold that land to the bank for exactly what was owed, nothing more. Bellamy got his money back, but apparently that is not enough for him. He wants me to pay for what he sees as a betrayal." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, and Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. She was acutely aware of how she must look, flower in her dark hair, her simple calico dress wrinkled from a long day's work at the boarding house. She was 22 years old and felt ancient with the weight of her father's mistakes pressing down on her shoulders. "Then we will make sure he understands you have nothing more to give," Wyatt said finally. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safer than this. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house is too exposed, too many windows." "Where would we go?" Violet asked, even as she was already moving toward her room to gather her few possessions. She had become an expert at packing quickly, at leaving places behind. My ranch is about 5 miles outside town. Small operation, just me and my brother working it, but it is defensible. Good sightlines, creek for water, and enough distance from town that Bellamy's men will have to come at us across open ground if they try anything. I cannot ask you to put yourself in danger for me. You do not even know me. Wyatt's jaw tightened. I know enough. I know you are scared but standing your ground anyway. I know you have been looking over your shoulder since you arrived in Cheyenne 3 months ago. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it to the sheriff. Said you barely sleep. Always watching the doors and windows like you are expecting someone to come through them any moment. And I know that no woman deserves to live like that. Something in Violet's chest loosened at his words, a knot she had not realized she was carrying. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Give me 5 minutes. True to her word, Violet emerged from her small room with a carpetbag containing everything she owned in the world. 3 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, and a small tin containing the last of her savings. It was not much to show for 22 years of life, but it was hers, earned through hard work and determination. Wyatt led her down the back stairs and through the kitchen, where Mrs. Henderson stood wringing her hands by the stove. The older woman had been kind to Violet, giving her work and asking few questions. Now her weathered face was creased with worry. You take care of our girl, Mrs. Henderson said to Wyatt, pressing a wrapped bundle into Violet's hands. That is bread and cheese for the road. And you, she turned to Violet, gripping her shoulders, you come back when it is safe, you hear me? Your room will be waiting. Violet embraced her quickly, fighting back tears. She had cried enough over the past year to last a lifetime. Thank you for everything. Wyatt's horse was a sturdy buckskin gelding named Denver, and he swung up into the saddle with practiced ease before reaching down to pull Violet up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, gasping as he lifted her as though she weighed nothing. She settled behind him, acutely aware of the solid warmth of his back against her chest, the strength in the arm she had to wrap around his waist to keep her seat. Hold tight, Wyatt said, and then they were moving, Denver's hooves striking sparks off the rocky street as they headed away from the center of town. Violet did look over her shoulder, unable to help herself. She saw 2 men emerging from the saloon, saw one of them point in their direction. Her fingers tightened involuntarily on Wyatt's shirt, and she felt rather than heard the low rumble of his voice. I see them. We will be fine. They rode hard for the first mile, Denver's powerful stride eating up the ground. The Wyoming landscape opened up around them, vast and beautiful and utterly unforgiving. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, turning the prairie grass to gold and casting long shadows from the scattered cottonwoods. In the distance, the mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks still touched with snow despite the July heat. Violet had grown up in Texas, where the land was different but equally harsh. She understood this country in her bones, the way it could nurture life one moment and snatch it away the next. But there was something about Wyoming that called to her, a sense of possibility she had not felt in years. Or maybe it was not the land at all. Maybe it was the steady, capable man she was clinging to, the one who had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. They slowed to a walk as they climbed a gentle rise, and Wyatt twisted in the saddle to look at her. You all right back there? Yes, Violet said, though her legs were already starting to ache from gripping Denver's sides. She was not used to riding anymore, had not been on a horse since selling her father's mare to help settle his debts. Ranch is just over this ridge. You will be able to see it in a minute. True to his word, as they crested the hill, Violet saw a small homestead nestled in a valley below. It was modest but well maintained, with a sturdy log cabin, a barn, and several outbuildings. Horses grazed in a corral, and she could see the glint of water from the creek Wyatt had mentioned. It looked like something from a dream, a place where a person could put down roots and actually stay. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He was younger than Wyatt, maybe 25 to Wyatt's clear 30 years, with the same strong build and sun-weathered skin. His eyes, though, were different, darker and more guarded. "Wyatt," he called, his gaze moving to Violet with open curiosity. "This the woman Sheriff Morton was talking about. This is Miss Violet Parker," Wyatt said, dismounting and then reaching up to help Violet down. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her, setting her on her feet with a gentleness that made her heart skip. "Violet, this is my brother James." James nodded to her, polite but reserved. "Madam." "You are welcome here, of course, but I have to say, taking on Marcus Bellamy is not something to do lightly. That man has a long reach and a longer memory." "I know," Violet said quietly, "and I am sorry to bring trouble to your door." "If there was anywhere else I could go, there is not," Wyatt interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "And even if there was, you are here now, and that is the end of it. James, help me get the shutters secured and check the ammunition. If Bellamy's men followed us, they will be here within the hour." But the hour passed, and then another, with no sign of pursuit. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Violet stood in the doorway of the cabin and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Inside, she could hear the low murmur of the brothers' voices as they discussed watch schedules and defensive positions. They were preparing for a siege, and it was all because of her. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the urge to run again. But where would she go? How far would she have to travel before Bellamy decided she was not worth the effort? California? Oregon? The very thought exhausted her. She was so tired of running, of looking over her shoulder, of never allowing herself to hope for anything resembling a normal life. "You are thinking too loud," Wyatt said from behind her, and Violet jumped. She had not heard him approach. He had a remarkable way of moving quietly for such a large man. "Sorry," she murmured. "I am just trying to figure out what to do next." "Next, you eat the stew James has been cooking all afternoon, then you get some rest. Tomorrow we will ride into town and talk to Sheriff Morton, see if we can get a handle on Bellamy's plans. You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple," Wyatt acknowledged, coming to stand beside her. He was close enough that she could smell the scent of horse and leather and something else, something essentially him. "But running yourself into the ground with worry will not help anything. You have been carrying this alone for too long. Let someone help you for a change." Violet turned to look at him, really look at him, in the fading light. He had strong features, a straight nose and a jaw shadowed with stubble. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who spent his days squinting into the sun, but also laugh lines that suggested he knew how to smile. She wanted to ask why he was doing this, what she could possibly mean to him, a stranger he had met only hours ago. But she was afraid of the answer, or perhaps afraid that there was no answer at all beyond simple human decency. "Why are you helping me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. 5 years ago, my sister Emily was being courted by a man named Thomas Grier. Seemed nice enough on the surface, came from a good family, had money. But Emily started getting nervous around him, started looking over her shoulder the way you do. My parents thought she was just having wedding jitters, told her all brides feel that way. I should have paid more attention. I should have asked her what was wrong. He paused, his jaw working. 2 weeks before the wedding, Thomas came to her window one night, drunk and angry because she had suggested postponing the ceremony. He tried to force his way into her room. Our father heard the commotion and ran him off, but the damage was done. Emily was terrified, and we learned that Thomas had a history of violence toward women, something he had hidden well. We broke the engagement, but Thomas did not take it well. He spread rumors about Emily, ruined her reputation, made it so she could not show her face in town without people whispering. "Where is she now?" Violet asked softly. "Montana, married to a good man who does not care about small-town gossip. She is happy now, or as happy as she can be." But I should have seen the signs sooner, should have trusted her instincts when she said something was wrong. He finally looked at Violet, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "When I saw you today, saw that same fear in your eyes, I swore I was not going to make the same mistake twice." "I am not your sister," Violet said, though her voice came out gentler than she intended. "No," Wyatt agreed. "You are not." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Violet felt heat flood her cheeks and turned away, but not before she saw something flicker in Wyatt's expression, something that made her pulse race. James called them in for dinner, breaking the tension, and Violet was grateful for the distraction. The stew was simple but hearty, thick with beef and vegetables from the brothers' garden. She ate more than she had in days, suddenly ravenous now that she felt marginally safe. The cabin was cozy, with thick log walls and simple furnishings that spoke of function over form. But there were touches of care too, curtains on the windows that someone had sewn with neat stitches, a colorful rag rug by the fireplace, books on a shelf by the door. "Your mother's things?" Violet asked, gesturing to the curtains. "Sister's," James said. "Emily made them before she left for Montana. Said we needed something to civilize the place. She did a good job." After dinner, Wyatt insisted Violet take his bed while he and James took turns keeping watch. She protested, but he would not hear of it, and she was too exhausted to argue for long. The bed was narrow but comfortable, the quilts soft and smelling faintly of sage. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, and tried to remember the last time she had felt this protected. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Every creak of the floorboards made her tense. Every distant sound from outside sent her heart racing. Old habits were hard to break. But eventually, lulled by the low murmur of Wyatt's voice as he talked quietly with his brother, Violet drifted off. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to place where she was. Then memory came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, pushing tangled hair from her face. She had slept in her dress, too anxious to undress properly, and now it was hopelessly wrinkled. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Wyatt at the stove, cooking breakfast with the easy competence of a man used to taking care of himself. He glanced up when she entered and offered her a small smile that did strange things to her insides. "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing to the pot. "Please," Violet said, moving to pour herself a cup. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. "Did anything happen last night?" "Quiet as church on Monday. Either Bellamy's men lost our trail or they are waiting for a better opportunity." He slid eggs and bacon onto a plate and handed it to her. "Eat up. We are riding into town soon as you are ready. Sheriff wants to talk to you, get your full story." Violet nodded, though her stomach tightened with anxiety. She had told her story so many times to the sheriff in Texas, to the bank officials, to the lawyer who had helped her sell the ranch. Each telling felt like peeling back a layer of skin, exposing wounds that never quite healed. They rode into Cheyenne an hour later, Violet once again seated behind Wyatt on Denver. James stayed behind to mind the ranch, but Violet did not miss the rifle he kept close at hand as they departed. The morning was clear and already warm, promising another scorching afternoon. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, and Violet understood why this land attracted people seeking a fresh start. There was something about all that open space that made you feel like anything was possible. Sheriff Morton was a grizzled man in his 50s with keen eyes that missed nothing. His office was small but tidy, with wanted posters papering one wall and a gun rack behind his desk. He gestured for Violet to sit, and then settled into his own chair with a creak of leather. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "Wyatt here tells me you have been having trouble with Marcus Bellamy out of Texas." "Yes, sir," Violet said, and launched into the story once more. She told him about her father's gambling, about the debts that had piled up, about selling the ranch and leaving Texas with barely enough money for a train ticket north. She explained about Bellamy's claim to additional papers she had never seen and did not believe existed. "Bellamy's a known quantity," Sheriff Morton said when she finished. "Had a few run-ins with him myself over the years. He has got business interests all through Texas and up into Colorado. Man like that, he does not take kindly to being told no, even when he is in the wrong. So what can we do?" Wyatt asked, leaning forward in his chair. "Legally, not much, unless his men make a move and we can catch them at it. Self-defense is one thing, but I cannot just run men out of town for asking questions, even if we all know what they are really here for." The sheriff's expression hardened. "But I can make sure Bellamy knows that Cheyenne looks after its own. I will send a telegram, make it clear that any trouble his men start here will have consequences, might make him think twice." "And if it does not?" Violet asked quietly. Sheriff Morton met her gaze squarely. "Then we deal with it when the time comes. But Miss Parker, I want you to know that you have friends here. Cheyenne might be rough around the edges, but we do not take kindly to men who terrorize women. You are under my protection now, and that means something." Violet felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She was not going to cry, not here, not now. "Thank you, Sheriff." They left the office and stepped out into the bright sunlight. The main street of Cheyenne was bustling with activity, cowboys and miners and settlers going about their business. Violet was hyper-aware of the stares they attracted, the way people's eyes followed her and Wyatt. Small towns thrived on gossip, and she wondered what stories were already circulating about the woman who had brought trouble to their doorstep. "Ignore them," Wyatt said, reading her thoughts. "They will find something else to talk about by next week." "Will they?" Violet asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Or will I always be the woman who brought Marcus Bellamy's wrath to Cheyenne?" Wyatt stopped walking and turned to face her, right there in the middle of the street. He reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You did not bring anything. Bellamy made his own choices, and anyone who says different can answer to me." His touch sent electricity through her, and Violet found herself unable to look away from his intense gaze. Around them, the town faded to insignificance. There was only Wyatt, solid and real and impossibly kind. "Miss Parker." "Violet Parker." The voice shattered the moment, and Violet spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. But it was not one of Bellamy's men. It was a woman, middle-aged and handsome, with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. "I am Catherine Mills," the woman said, extending her hand. "I run the schoolhouse here in town. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that you have teaching experience." Violet shook her hand, struggling to catch up with the sudden change in subject. "Yes, I taught for 2 years back in Texas before my father fell ill." "Wonderful," Catherine said, her smile widening. Our current teacher is moving to Denver at the end of the summer, and we are desperately in need of a replacement. The pay is not much, but it comes with a small cottage and the respect of the community. Would you be interested? Violet opened her mouth, then closed it again. A job, a cottage, the possibility of staying in one place, of building something resembling a life. It was everything she had dreamed of and thought impossible. I would be very interested, she said carefully, but you should know that I may have to leave Cheyenne on short notice. There are complications in my situation. Catherine waved a hand dismissively. Mrs. Henderson told me about your troubles. Marcus Bellamy is a bully and a coward, and I have no doubt that Sheriff Morton will send him packing soon enough. In the meantime, you will be under the protection of this entire town. We take care of our teachers, Miss Parker. They are far too precious to lose to the likes of Marcus Bellamy. I do not know what to say, Violet admitted, feeling overwhelmed. Say yes, and come by the schoolhouse tomorrow so I can show you around. Term starts in 6 weeks, which gives us plenty of time to prepare. Catherine squeezed her hand once more and then swept off down the street, already greeting another townswoman. Violet turned to Wyatt, who was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. That was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? I am not sure yet, Violet admitted. It is hard to make plans when I do not know if I will be alive to see them through. Wyatt's expression darkened. You will be alive. I promise you that. They spent another hour in town, gathering supplies and letting themselves be seen. Wyatt seemed to know everyone, stopping to chat with the blacksmith, the general store owner, the banker. Each time, he introduced Violet by name, making it clear that she was someone under his protection. Violet understood what he was doing, making it impossible for Bellamy's men to come after her quietly. The more people who knew her, the more witnesses there would be. It was smart, but it also meant that Violet had to smile and make small talk when all she wanted to do was hide. By the time they started back to the ranch, she was exhausted, her face aching from holding herself together. You did well, Wyatt said as they rode. Violet had given up any pretense of modesty and was now leaning against his back, her arms wrapped securely around his waist. I feel like I am performing in a play where I do not know my lines. You will get used to it, and it will not be like this forever. Eventually, this will just be your life, not something you are surviving. Violet wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. But every time she tried to imagine a future, all she saw was the shadow of Marcus Bellamy looming over everything. They were about 2 miles from the ranch when Denver's ears flicked forward and Wyatt tensed. Violet felt it immediately, her own body going rigid with fear. What is it? She whispered. Someone is up ahead around that bend. Wyatt's hand moved to his gun. Could be nothing, could be James come to meet us, but stay alert. They rounded the bend and Violet's breath caught. 3 men on horseback blocked the road, all of them armed. She recognized one of them from Bellamy's ranch in Texas, a cruel-faced man named Dale who had taken too much pleasure in making her uncomfortable. Well now, Dale said, his lips pulling back in a smile that did not reach his eyes. Look what we found. Miss Parker, Mr. Bellamy has been real worried about you. Thinks maybe you are confused about what belongs to him. The lady does not have anything that belongs to Bellamy, Wyatt said, his voice cold and flat. And you are blocking our path. I would suggest you move. Dale laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. You must be the Crawford boy who thinks he is a hero. Let me give you some advice, friend. Bellamy always gets what he wants. Always. You are just delaying the inevitable and putting yourself in the line of fire. Smart man would hand over the girl and ride away. Then I guess I am not that smart, Wyatt said. His hand had not moved from his gun, and Violet could feel the tension thrumming through his body. This is your one chance to leave. Take it." "Can't do that," Dale said, though some of his confidence seemed to have wavered. The two men with him exchanged glances, clearly less certain about the confrontation. "Bellamy wants to talk to the girl. Just talk, nothing more. She comes with us, has a conversation, clears up this misunderstanding." "No," Violet said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I will not go anywhere with you. I do not have whatever papers Mr. Bellamy thinks I have, and even if I did, I would not give them to him. He has taken enough from me." Dale's expression darkened. "You are making this harder than it has to be." What happened next was almost too fast for Violet to follow. Dale's hand moved toward his gun, and suddenly, Wyatt was moving too, Denver dancing sideways as Wyatt drew his Colt with fluid speed. The crack of the gunshot was deafening, and Dale howled, clutching his hand where Wyatt's bullet had struck. "Next one goes through your chest," Wyatt said calmly, his gun now trained on Dale's companions. "You two drop your weapons. Do it now." They hesitated, but the cold certainty in Wyatt's voice convinced them. Gun belts hit the dirt, and Wyatt nodded. "Good. Now get your friend and ride back to wherever you came from. Tell Bellamy that if he wants to talk to Miss Parker, he can do it through Sheriff Morton. And tell him that any more attempts like this will be met with bullets, not words." Dale was white-faced with pain, cradling his injured hand. "You are a dead man, Crawford. You hear me?" "Dead, maybe," Wyatt said, "but I will still be alive when you are gone. Now ride." They rode, Dale cursing and bleeding, his companions looking relieved to escape with their lives. Wyatt did not holster his gun until they were out of sight, and even then he kept it resting on his thigh. "Are you hurt?" he asked, twisting to look at Violet. She realized she was shaking, her teeth chattering despite the heat. No, I am fine. You could have been killed." "But I was not." He reached back and covered one of her hands with his own, squeezing gently. "I told you, Violet, I am not letting anyone hurt you." The use of her first name, so casual and intimate, made her heart skip. She squeezed his hand back, unable to find words for the tumult of emotions crashing through her. They made it back to the ranch without further incident, though Wyatt kept checking their back trail, watching for signs of pursuit. James met them at the door, taking one look at Wyatt's expression and immediately reaching for his rifle. "Trouble." "Bellamy's men, 3 of them," Wyatt said, helping Violet down from Denver. "I put a bullet through one's hand. They will be back, and next time they will be ready for a fight." "How long do you think we have?" "Not long. Maybe a day, maybe less." Wyatt rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking tired. "We need to be ready for anything." That night was tense, all 3 of them taking turns on watch while the others tried to rest. Violet lay in Wyatt's bed once more, staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound. She thought about Catherine Mills and the teaching job, about the cottage and the possibility of staying in Cheyenne. It seemed like a cruel joke, to be offered everything she wanted just as it was about to be ripped away. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to find the cabin filled with gray pre-dawn light. She could hear voices outside, low and urgent, and her heart began to race. She scrambled out of bed and ran to the window, peering out through the gap in the shutters. At least a dozen men were spread out in a loose semicircle around the cabin, all of them armed. In the center, on a fine black horse, sat a man she recognized even at this distance. Marcus Bellamy himself had come to Cheyenne. Violet pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. This was worse than she had imagined. Bellamy never went anywhere unless he was absolutely certain of the outcome. If he was here, it meant he intended to finish this today, one way or another. She ran to the main room and found Wyatt and James already positioned at windows, rifles ready. Wyatt glanced at her, his expression grim. "Stay away from the windows. Get into the back room and barricade the door." "No," Violet said. "This is about me. I will not hide while you risk your lives." "Violet," I said no. She moved to his side, ignoring the way James muttered something under his breath. "What does he want?" As if in answer, Bellamy's voice rang out across the yard. "Miss Parker, I know you are in there. Come out and let us settle this like civilized people. No need for anyone to get hurt." Wyatt moved to block her when she started toward the door, but Violet pushed past him. She was done hiding, done running. If Bellamy wanted to talk, then they would talk, but it would be on her terms. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, ignoring Wyatt's furious curse behind her. Bellamy smiled when he saw her, the expression as cold as a snake's. "Miss Parker, you have led me on quite the chase." "I have not led you anywhere, Mr. Bellamy. I left Texas and hoped never to see you again. You are the one who decided to follow me." "Because you took something that belongs to me," Bellamy said, his voice hardening. "Your father signed papers giving me water rights to that creek. Those papers were part of the ranch sale, and you had no right to sell without turning them over to me." "I never found any such papers," Violet said, her voice shaking with anger now rather than fear. "I went through every document my father left behind. There was nothing about water rights, nothing with your name on it except the loan agreements, and those were satisfied when I sold the ranch." "You are lying," Bellamy said flatly. "Your father told me he kept those papers in his office safe. You opened that safe and you took them." "The safe was empty," Violet said. "Maybe my father lied to you, maybe he never signed any papers at all, or maybe he destroyed them before he died. But I do not have them, and I never did. You have been chasing me across 2 territories for nothing." Bellamy's face darkened with rage, and Violet saw his hand move toward his gun. But before he could draw, a shot rang out, not from the cabin but from somewhere beyond the trees. One of Bellamy's men cried out and fell from his horse. Suddenly, the yard erupted in chaos. More shots came from the trees, and Violet realized with shock that Sheriff Morton and a dozen deputies had surrounded the ranch. Bellamy's men scattered, some returning fire, others trying to flee. Wyatt grabbed Violet and hauled her back into the cabin, pushing her to the floor and covering her body with his own as bullets thudded into the walls. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. Bellamy's men, caught in crossfire and outnumbered, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Only Bellamy himself tried to run, spurring his horse toward the creek. But Sheriff Morton was ready, shooting the horse out from under him. Bellamy hit the ground hard and did not get up. In the ringing silence that followed, Violet became aware that she was pressed against Wyatt's chest, his heart hammering against her cheek. His arms were wrapped around her, protective and strong, and she found she did not want him to let go. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It is over," Wyatt said, but he did not move. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, until Sheriff Morton's voice called from outside. "Everyone all right in there?" Wyatt finally released her, though his hand lingered on her shoulder as he helped her to her feet. They emerged onto the porch to find Bellamy face down in the dirt, his hands being tied behind his back by a deputy. The rancher was cursing and spitting, demanding a lawyer, threatening everyone within earshot. Sheriff Morton approached the porch, tipping his hat to Violet. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance, madam. I had a telegraph from the Texas Rangers waiting for me when I got back to town yesterday. Seems Mr. Bellamy is wanted for questioning in the death of a man who owed him money. Fellow fell off a cliff under suspicious circumstances. Rangers figured if Bellamy was making trouble up here, it was time to bring him in." "You mean he is going to jail?" Violet asked, hardly daring to believe it. "For a good long while, I expect, and if he is found guilty of murder, he will hang." Either way, Miss Parker, you will not have to worry about him anymore. The sheriff's weathered face creased into a smile. You are free, free. The word echoed in Violet's mind like a bell. She was free. Free to stay in Cheyenne. Free to take the teaching job. Free to stop looking over her shoulder. Free to build the life she had always wanted. She turned to Wyatt, and whatever he saw in her expression made his breath catch. Without thinking, without caring that the sheriff and half the town were watching, Violet threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered against his ear. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for everything." Wyatt's arms came around her waist, holding her close. "You do not have to thank me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." She pulled back just enough to look at him, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "Would you?" "Violet," he said, her name a rough whisper. "I know this is not the time or place, and I know we barely know each other. But these past 2 days, watching you be so brave despite being terrified, seeing your strength and your kindness, I have to tell you that I do not," Violet interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "Do not say it now, not while you are high on adrenaline and relief. Say it tomorrow when everything is calm and you have had time to think. If you still feel the same way, then I want to hear it. But I need to know it is real." Wyatt caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her entire body. "Tomorrow, then. But Violet, I already know what I am going to say." The next few hours passed in a blur. Sheriff Morton and his deputies hauled Bellamy and his men back to town, while James started repairing the bullet holes in the cabin walls. Violet helped where she could, but mostly she found herself stealing glances at Wyatt, catching him doing the same to her. The air between them hummed with possibility, with promise. That evening, as the sun set in a glory of orange and gold, Wyatt found her standing by the creek, watching the water flow past. He approached quietly, but she heard him, turning with a smile. "Could not wait until tomorrow." She teased gently. "I am not here to say what I promised to say tomorrow," Wyatt said, coming to stand beside her. "I am just here to be with you. Is that all right?" "More than all right." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the creek and the play of fading light on the water. Violet felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in over a year, a sense that everything was exactly as it should be. "My father loved water," she said suddenly. "Always said that a man with water rights could build an empire. That is why he started gambling in the first place, trying to get enough money to buy more land with access to water sources. He had this dream of being important, of leaving behind a legacy. But all he left behind was debt and heartache." "Is that why you are so certain there were no papers about water rights?" Violet nodded. "If my father had actually secured water rights to that creek, he would have told everyone who would listen. He would have treasured those papers like gold. The fact that I never heard him mention them, never saw them in the safe. I know they do not exist. Bellamy was either lied to by my father, or he made the whole thing up as an excuse to squeeze more money out of our land. Either way, it is over now. You are safe." "Because of you," Violet said, turning to face him. "Wyatt, I need you to understand something. I have spent the last year convinced that I did not deserve safety, that I was paying for my father's sins. But you made me believe that I deserved better. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left." Wyatt reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You always deserved better, Violet. I just wish you had not had to go through so much to find it." She caught his hand before he could pull away, holding it against her cheek. "If I had not gone through it, I would not have ended up here, with you, and I find that I do not regret that at all." "Tomorrow," Wyatt reminded her, but his voice was strained, his eyes dark with emotion. "Tomorrow," Violet agreed. But that night, As she lay once more in Wyatt's bed while he and James kept watch, Violet already knew what her answer would be when he finally spoke the words. She had known since he first stepped between her and danger, since he had looked at her with those steady creek water eyes and promised her safety. She had known since he held her after the shootout, his heart beating against hers, his arms a shelter she never wanted to leave. Tomorrow could not come fast enough. Morning arrived with a sky so blue and clear it hurt to look at. Violet woke feeling rested for the first time in recent memory, the nightmares that usually plagued her sleep blessedly absent. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and braided her dark hair with hands that only trembled slightly. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Wyatt alone in the cabin, standing by the window with a cup of coffee. He turned when he heard her, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning." He set down his coffee and crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months. Where is James?" "I sent him into town on an errand. I wanted us to have some privacy for this conversation." Wyatt took a deep breath, and Violet could see the tension in his shoulders, the nervousness in his eyes. This capable, confident man was actually nervous, and the realization made her heart swell. "Wyatt, let me say this," he interrupted gently, "because if I do not say it now, I might lose my nerve." He squeezed her hands, his calloused thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "Violet Parker, I know we have only known each other for 3 days. I know that by any logical measure, this is too fast, too soon. But I learned 5 years ago, when my sister almost married a man who would have destroyed her, that sometimes you have to trust your instincts. Sometimes you have to take a chance on what feels right, even if it does not make sense on paper." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "You feel right, Violet. From the moment I saw you in that boarding house, scared but standing your ground, I knew you were someone special. These past few days, getting to know you, seeing your courage and your kindness and your strength, I have fallen for you, completely and utterly. And I know it is crazy, and I know you probably need time, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that I would very much like to see where this could go, if you will give me a chance." Violet felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, the kind she had almost forgotten could exist. "You do not think it is too fast? I think life is unpredictable and short, and when you find something worth holding on to, you hold tight and do not let go." Wyatt released one of her hands to gently wipe away her tears. "But if you need more time, I understand. I am not going anywhere. I will wait as long as you need." "I do not need more time," Violet said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Because I feel it too, Wyatt. I did not think I could after everything with my father after running for so long. But you made me feel safe. You made me feel seen. And somewhere between Cheyenne and this ranch, I fell in love with you." The joy that spread across Wyatt's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "You mean that?" "I mean it. I love you, Wyatt Crawford. And if you are willing to take a chance on a woman with more baggage than any person should have to carry, then I would very much like to see where this goes too." Wyatt let out a whoop of pure happiness and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless, both grinning like fools. "I want to do this right," Wyatt said, suddenly serious. "I want to court you properly, take you to church socials and dinners. I want everyone in Cheyenne to see that you are my girl, that I am proud to be with you. And then, when enough time has passed that people do not think we have lost our minds, I want to marry you, if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," Wyatt said, though his eyes danced with amusement. "I am telling you that I am going to ask you to marry me." When the time is right, when you are ready. But I wanted you to know my intentions from the start. I am not interested in anything casual, Violet. I want forever with you." "Forever sounds perfect," Violet whispered, and then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her. She could not quite tell who moved first and did not care. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss sweet and full of promise. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed a kiss could be. When they finally broke apart, Violet was flushed and smiling, her heart racing with joy rather than fear for the first time in memory. Wyatt rested his forehead against hers, both of them trying to catch their breath. "I love you," he said again, as if he could not quite believe he was allowed to say it. "I love you too," Violet replied, and the words felt like coming home. The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness. True to his word, Wyatt courted Violet properly, driving her into town every Sunday for church and sitting beside her in the pew, his hand covering hers. He took her to barn dances and picnics, introduced her to everyone as the woman he was courting, making it clear to all of Cheyenne that Violet Parker was under his protection and his affection. Violet began preparing for the teaching position, meeting with Catherine Mills to learn the curriculum and plan lessons. The cottage that came with the job was small but charming, with 2 rooms and a little garden plot. Violet could picture herself there, living independently but knowing that Wyatt was just a few miles away at the ranch. But as the weeks turned into months, she found herself spending more and more time at the ranch, helping with chores and cooking meals for Wyatt and James. It started to feel like home in a way no place had since her mother died, and she realized she did not want to live in that cottage alone. She wanted to wake up every morning beside Wyatt, wanted to build a life and a family with him. Autumn arrived, painting the prairie in shades of gold and copper. The teaching term started and Violet threw herself into the work, loving every moment of it. Her students ranged from 6 to 14, and they were eager and curious and full of potential. She felt like she was finally doing something meaningful, making a difference in these children's lives. On a crisp October evening, exactly 4 months after the day they met, Wyatt took Violet back to the spot by the creek where they had first confessed their feelings. The leaves on the cottonwoods glowed golden in the setting sun, and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. "I have been thinking," Wyatt said, taking her hands in his, "about what I said that morning about waiting until enough time had passed, and I realized something. 4 months is not very long by most standards, but it has been long enough for me to be absolutely certain of what I want." He dropped to one knee, and Violet gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "Violet Parker, you are the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have brought joy and light into my life in ways I did not know were possible. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was perfect, a symbol of something real and lasting. "Yes," Violet said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Wyatt, I will marry you, today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Yes." Wyatt stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, both grinning like children on Christmas morning. "I was thinking we could get married in the spring," Wyatt said. "Give us time to plan a proper wedding, invite your aunt from Kansas and my sister from Montana." "Spring sounds perfect," Violet agreed, though privately she thought she could marry him that very night and be perfectly happy. They married on a warm day in April 1877, in the small church in Cheyenne with half the town in attendance. Violet wore a dress that Catherine Mills and several other women from town had helped her sew, white lace over pale blue silk that made her feel like a princess from a fairy tale. Wyatt wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, and his eyes bright with happiness as he watched her walk down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed her with such tenderness that Violet felt her heart might burst from sheer joy. They celebrated with a dance at the town hall, eating cake and laughing with friends until late into the night. Finally, as the stars wheeled overhead and the music wound down, Wyatt swept Violet up into his arms and carried her out to Denver, who was waiting patiently outside. They rode back to the ranch together, Violet's white dress glowing in the moonlight, both of them too happy for words. Their wedding night was everything Violet had hoped for and more, a beautiful coming together of two people who loved each other desperately. Wyatt was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt cherished and safe. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, the culmination of months of waiting and wanting. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Violet's head resting on Wyatt's chest as he played with her unbound hair. "I love you, Mrs. Crawford," he murmured into the darkness. "I love you too, Mr. Crawford," Violet replied, smiling at how natural the name sounded. She was Violet Crawford now, no longer alone, no longer running. She had found her home. The years that followed were not always easy. Running a ranch in Wyoming meant hard work and long hours, dealing with harsh winters and dry summers. But Violet and Wyatt faced every challenge together, their love growing stronger with each passing season. James eventually met a young widow named Sarah who had come to Cheyenne seeking a fresh start, and after a brief courtship, they married. James built a house on the far side of the ranch, and the two couples often gathered for Sunday dinners, sharing stories and laughter. In the spring of 1878, Violet discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure, but Wyatt was thrilled, already making plans for a nursery and talking about teaching their child to ride. She continued teaching through the early months of her pregnancy, finally stepping down when she grew too large to comfortably stand for hours. On a snowy December morning, Violet gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Wyatt's eyes and her dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Wyatt's father, and from the moment Wyatt held his son for the first time, Violet knew she had never seen him happier. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Emily, after Wyatt's sister. And 3 years after that, another boy arrived whom they called Jacob. The ranch house rang with the sound of children's laughter, with the chaos of family dinners and bedtime stories and scraped knees. Violet had given up teaching when Thomas was born, finding that being a mother was more than enough to fill her days. But she never lost her love of learning or her desire to educate, and she made sure all her children could read and write and do figures long before they started school. On winter evenings, she would gather them around the fire and read aloud, instilling in them a love of stories and imagination. Wyatt was a wonderful father, patient and loving and always willing to get down on the floor and play with his children. He taught them to ride as soon as they could sit a horse, took them fishing in the creek, showed them how to care for the animals. And every night, without fail, he kissed each of them good night before finding Violet and pulling her into his arms. "I love you," he would say, the same words he had spoken on their wedding night and every night since. "I love you too," she would reply, and mean it more with each passing year. In 1885, Marcus Bellamy died in a Texas prison, serving out a life sentence for murder. Violet felt nothing when she heard the news, no satisfaction or grief, just a distant sense of closure. That chapter of her life had ended long ago, on the day Wyatt first looked at her and promised to keep her safe. As their children grew, the ranch prospered. Wyatt and James expanded their operation, breeding horses that were in demand across Wyoming and beyond. Violet managed the household accounts with the same meticulous care she had once used to settle her father's debts, making sure they always stayed within their means and saved for the future. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved books as much as ranching. Emily was spirited and adventurous, always the first to volunteer for any challenge. And Jacob was the peacemaker, sweet-natured and kind, with a gift for gentling even the wildest horses. In the autumn of 1890, on a crisp evening very like the one when Wyatt had proposed, Violet stood once more by the creek, watching the water flow past. She was 36 years old now, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of laughter. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the ranch, Thomas calling to his father about a fence that needed mending, Emily and Jacob arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, strong arms wrapped around her waist, and Wyatt rested his chin on her shoulder. At 42, he was still as handsome as the day she met him, though his hair was now more silver than brown. He had grown into himself over the years, the ranch and fatherhood giving him a solid contentment that showed in every line of his body. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice warm in her ear. "About how far we have come," Violet said, leaning back against him. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together? I was so scared, so certain that I would never be free of the past." "I remember. I also remember telling you that everything would be all right and you not believing me." Violet laughed softly. "I did not believe much of anything back then, except maybe that you were either very brave or very foolish to help me." "Definitely foolish," Wyatt said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. That was the day my life really began, Violet. The day I met you." She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I used to think I did not deserve happiness. I spent so long running, so long looking over my shoulder, convinced that Marcus Bellamy would never stop coming. But you taught me that I was worth protecting, worth loving. You gave me everything I never dared to hope for." "You gave me everything too," Wyatt said, covering her hands with his own. "A home, a family, a reason to be grateful every single day. I love you, Wyatt Crawford. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Violet whispered, and kissed him as the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Later that evening, after dinner had been eaten and the children had been shooed off to bed, Violet and Wyatt sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one. The night was cool but not cold, perfect for sitting outside and simply being together. "Thomas wants to go to Denver next year," Wyatt said suddenly. "He is thinking about studying law. I know, he told me." Violet took Wyatt's hand, lacing their fingers together. "What do you think?" "I think he would make a fine lawyer. He has the mind for it and the integrity. But I will miss him terribly when he goes. So will I. But we raised him to chase his dreams wherever they might lead. We cannot hold him back just because we will miss him." Wyatt squeezed her hand. "When did you get so wise?" "I have always been wise. You just did not notice because you were too busy being heroic." He laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "I was never heroic. I just did what anyone would do." "You were heroic to me," Violet said seriously. "You still are, every day in 1,000 small ways. The way you listen to Emily talk about her dreams of seeing the ocean. The way you work with Jacob on his reading, never losing patience even when he struggles. The way you still look at me like I am the most beautiful thing you have ever seen, even though I am old and wrinkled now." "You are not old," Wyatt protested, "and you are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. That has not changed and never will." Violet smiled, feeling that familiar warmth bloom in her chest, the one that only Wyatt could create. "We have built a good life together, have we not?" "The best life," Wyatt agreed, "though it has not always been easy." "No," Violet said, thinking of the hard winters they had endured, the years when the ranch barely broke even, the scarlet fever that had swept through Cheyenne when Emily was small and nearly taken her from them. "But we survived it all. We survived it together." "Together," Wyatt echoed and raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown her on the day they met. "That is the secret, is it not? Together we can weather anything." In the years that followed, life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Thomas did go to Denver to study law, graduating with honors and eventually opening a practice in Cheyenne that focused on helping settlers protect their land rights. Violet was proud beyond measure, seeing her son fight for people like she had once been, people who needed someone to stand up for them. Emily, true to her adventurous nature, married a surveyor and traveled with him throughout the West, sending long letters filled with descriptions of mountains and deserts and the Pacific Ocean she had always dreamed of seeing. She eventually settled in San Francisco, where she opened a school for girls and proved herself to be as fierce and capable as her mother. Jacob stayed on the ranch, taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations as Wyatt and James grew older. He married a quiet, gentle woman named Anna who reminded Violet of herself at that age, and together they had 4 children who filled the ranch house with noise and chaos and love. Wyatt and Violet grew old together, their love only deepening with time. They celebrated their 25th anniversary in 1902, surrounded by children and grandchildren, a house full of laughter and joy. Violet looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and thought about the terrified young woman who had arrived in Cheyenne all those years ago, looking over her shoulder and certain that happiness was not meant for her. That woman would never have believed this was possible, that she could have this much love, this much family, this much peace. But Wyatt had believed it for her when she could not believe it for herself. He had watched her back when danger threatened, had stood between her and harm without hesitation. And then, when the danger passed, he had loved her with a constancy and devotion that had healed all her old wounds. On a warm summer evening in 1910, Wyatt died peacefully in his sleep, Violet's hand in his. He was 64 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Violet was devastated by his loss, feeling as though half of herself had been torn away. But she was also grateful, so incredibly grateful for the 33 years they had shared, for the family they had built, for every moment of joy and sorrow they had experienced together. At his funeral, she stood surrounded by their children and grandchildren, a family that existed because Wyatt Crawford had once seen a frightened woman and decided to help her. She thought about all the ways their lives had intertwined, all the choices that had led them to each other. If her father had not gambled, if Bellamy had not pursued her, if she had not fled to Cheyenne, if Wyatt had not been in that boarding house at exactly the right moment, none of this would exist. It was impossible to say whether the pain had been worth the joy, whether the years of running and fear had been a fair price for the love she found. But Violet knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not change a single moment. Every hardship, every tear, every sleepless night had led her to Wyatt, and that made it all worthwhile. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, finally passing peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1918 at the age of 64, the same age Wyatt had been when he died. Her family buried her beside him, under a cottonwood tree by the creek where they had first confessed their love. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, Thomas had added a line from one of the love letters Wyatt had written her during their courtship, a letter she had treasured all her life. "You are my shelter in every storm, my light in every darkness. I will watch your back today and always." And in the end, that was the truest thing that could be said about Violet and Wyatt Crawford. They had watched each other's backs through every challenge life threw at them. They had loved each other fiercely and completely, building a legacy that would live on in their children and grandchildren and beyond. The ranch still stood, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to give up on each other. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Wyoming prairie and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, some said you could still feel their presence by the creek. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other for all time. Their story became legend in Cheyenne, the tale of the frightened woman who kept looking over her shoulder and the cowboy who watched her back day and night. It was told to children as a bedtime story, to young lovers as inspiration, to anyone who needed to believe that true love was possible, that one person's courage could change another person's life, that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, happy endings were not just fairy tales. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with Violet and Wyatt together, happy and in love, proving that sometimes the best things in life come when you stop running and let yourself be found.